I'd like to take you back to your first days at school. Remember those? Teacher asked a question, what's the capital of North Dakota? And your hand shot up, you wanted to be the first one with the right answer? Yeah, that was me. Or maybe you were the kid who pulled his arm down tight and tried to hide behind the person in front of you. You didn't want to get picked on? That was me too, in math class. That's when it all began. That's when our identities began to be shaped and formed to see ourselves as individual competitors. And the competition only got more intense over time. You competed throughout school, you competed to get into college, you competed for a job, you competed for a promotion. And through it all, we're told that the greatest good for the whole comes from each of us relentlessly pursuing our own self-interest. But the funny thing is, when you take a broader look at history, competitor was never our great evolutionary advantage. We were never the biggest or the fastest or the strongest out there. Our evolutionary superpower was the ability to work in community. We humans are a social species. We thrived because we were able to cooperate and work together, first to hunt and for protection, and then to trade and to build cities, and eventually to form connections that span the globe. Our default thinking was misshaped. You want to step back now and see why this matters today. What's this difference in how we conceive ourselves? It's because we face some of the most daunting, most complex challenges our species has ever faced. Climate change, biodiversity loss, massive social stress. And we aren't coming together quickly enough to meet them. These are existential threats, and we aren't rising to the challenge. And I think a big part of the problem is because we've set our default thinking to see ourselves as individuals and competitors. It's blunting some of our most profound human capabilities. I want to help you reset defaults in our defaults. But first, let me say, I don't want to blame teachers for all of this. I have great respect for teachers. I am a teacher. So it's not all what you had learned in school. We also have to look at our narrative tradition. It goes back millennia. Stories are essential to our humanity. They're how we learn. They're how we transfer our culture, our traditions, our values from generation to generation. And our stories tend to have a protagonist and an antagonist. That works great for stories. Stories simplify, but reality is more complex. And they teach us we're dependent upon individuals. My research shows that lone superstar is not how we achieve our greatest accomplishments. It's not how change happens. And I don't think it's how we're going to solve these big, big problems we face right now. So let me give you some counterexamples. Let me take you back again, this time to the greatest moment in recorded human history. Everyone in this room knows exactly where they were. It's autumn 2004. The Boston Red Sox staged the greatest comeback in sports history, right? We go by the dreaded New York Yankees. We sweep the World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals. The 86-year curse of the Bambino is broken. And of course there were stars on that team. Big Papi and Pedro and Veritek and Wake. I don't want to suggest that there were not essential individuals. There are. But when you look more deeply, that team was a self-described bunch of idiots. They don't talk about their individual stats. They talk about supporting each other, respecting each other, even their love for each other. That team was truly a team. No single player carried the others on his back. Instead, throughout the season, different players stepped up to deliver the performances necessary for them to win again and again and again. Let me take you back again, this time to a more somber moment. And again, everyone in this room will know exactly where they were. It's April 15th, 2013, 2:49 p.m. One and then two bombs explode near the finish line to the Boston Marathon. 3 people are killed instantly, 264 were injured or wounded. And as horrific as that day was, there were also miracles. Those 264 people, they were evacuated from the scene in just 22 minutes. Every one of them survived that day. They survived thanks to the heroic efforts of first responders, and doctors, and nurses, and bystanders. People who by all rights should have run away to take care of their own safety. Instead, they stayed. They applied tourniquets, they helped move the wounded, they saved lives. And 102 hours later, that incident was over. One suspect was dead, the other was in custody. The city could breathe again. It was Boston strong. Now, my colleagues and I studied that incident in great depth. We interviewed the governor, the mayor, the leaders of many of the agencies involved. And what was interesting was they swept away any consideration of personal glory or taking credit for themselves. They talked about working together, supporting each other, being there to help each other out. Now let's fast forward to 2018. A lone Swedish schoolgirl goes on strike to protest lack of action on climate change. Greta Thunberg. If Greta had remained a lone activist, she would have been interesting, but not compelling. But that isn't what happened. She inspired millions of other school children just like herself to go on strike to demand action. But Greta was an individual, but an individual dedicated to collective action. When she was interviewed, she said it was never about her. It was always about the movement. Now, I could go on and on. There are many, many examples. But instead, I would like to talk about how do we pivot our thinking? How do we shift those defaults so that we can tackle these big challenges we're facing? The first shift we have to make is from scarcity to abundance. Waiting for that lone hero, waiting for Superman, that's a scarcity mindset. Seeing the potential in everyone to contribute, that's abundance thinking. That's what the Red Sox did in 2004. Yes, they had superstars, but they also depended on players who were never going to be shoo-ins for the Hall of Fame. Instead, they created the conditions in which that collective talent could emerge. And they triumphed. The second shift is to choose cultivation over extraction. What happened in the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombings was no accident. For a decade, leaders in this town have been planning and been preparing, exercising and drilling, forming social and operational bonds, so that when the worst case scenario became reality, they were able to respond as one. It was not about getting the most from people. It was about creating the community ready and willing to give the most for and to each other. And the third shift is from me to we. Language matters. It actually lights up different neural networks. It frames how we perceive reality. Greta Thunberg and other young activists, David Hogue and others, have made it very clear. They're not acting in their own self-interest. They're acting for the greater good. They're acting for the greater we. We opens the door to more inclusive thought and action. We makes it easier to look beyond narrow self-interest. We is how we have to face the future. Now, I have no illusions that this is going to be easy. We Americans have mythologized the bold individual from George Washington to Elon Musk. But those myths are just that, they're myths. And myths are not reality, and myths will not save us now. Defaults are not immutable. They're not set in concrete. All it takes is the courage and the conviction and the commitment to change our thinking, to reframe how we're approaching our challenges. I think we can do that. And I think we can do that right here and right now. I want you to take a look to your left and a look to your right, and a look in front of you and a look behind. The inventiveness, the ingenuity, the intelligence in this room is extraordinary. And this is just one room. There are thousands, even tens of thousands of rooms just like this around the world. We can do it. We can solve these problems, but we can only do it together. Thank you.